I've been considering the different endings in the resurrection accounts between Matthew and Mark specifically. They obviously Luke and John have their own accounts. In Matthew's account, it says when the women are witnesses to the empty tomb and they see some angels, they hurry away from the tomb. Matthew 28:8, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. However, in Mark 16:8, it says, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And a lot of people, including myself actually, when I first came across these verses ages ago, like years ago, would see this as a flat contradiction, since Matthew says that the women ran to tell his disciples, whereas Mark says the women said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And Mark's gospel abruptly ends at that point, whereas Matthew's gospel then goes on to describe how Jesus appears to the women and tells them to go and tell his disciples. However, I think the reason that Mark's gospel ends abruptly at this point is to make a very deliberate point that if you leave the story here, then there really would be nothing to say and there would be no message to communicate to anyone. If all the women saw were two or one or however many angels telling them to go and tell their disciples, but they did not see the risen Jesus himself, there would be no Christianity, and therefore there would be no message to share. And I think this is consistent with how Mark says that Jesus, sorry, I'm just moving the camera here, how Jesus constantly tells people to keep his identity a secret. And it makes at several points after the transfiguration, for example, and in other locations, it says that it's only after Jesus is risen again that the disciples communicate about who he is. And there seems to be this desire on Jesus' behalf that no one knows who he is until he has died and until he is risen again. And I think this would be very consistent that until the women see Jesus risen again, there would be no message to share with anyone, since the full understanding, the full revelation of who Jesus is not complete at that point. And for me, that makes a lot of sense of why Mark really emphasizes that the women didn't say anything to anyone. Now, you can harmonize these accounts and say, well, they told the disciples afterwards, and so it was a temporary silence. But I do think Mark deliberately emphasizes that silence.